heard Dr. Bull's Ground, composed by John Bull, the first Gresham Professor of Music. Bull was born in about 1562 in Radnorshire, now Wales, and died in Antwerp in 1628. The work is preserved in a single late 17th century volume of English keyboard music in the collections of London's Royal College of Music. In this, the first recording of the volume, we heard RCM harpsichord professor Terence Charleston playing a spinet made here in London in the 1680s by Stephen Keane. This instrument also resides at the RCM in the Museum of Instruments, and you can see it on the current slide. This recording was featured recently in the Secular Spaces division of the Baroque Style in the Age of Magnificence exhibition at London's Victoria and Albert Museum as part of our collaborative listening gallery project. The spinet is certainly amongst objects that would have been found in domestic spaces at that time. Like the instrument, the volume itself is a real treasure, containing collections of both preludes and fugues, and preserving music dating from before the English Civil War of 1642 to 1651 by William Byrd and Thomas Weelkes, as well as works by later composers like Matthew Locke and John Blow. We heard one of two grounds in the volume by John Bull. Whilst keyboard music forms the most significant and extensive of Bull's surviving compositional legacy, it is nonetheless difficult comprehensively to assess this corpus of works due to the untrustworthiness of many attributions. We're not sure who owned the volume, but it's certainly representative of the collections of music, often called virginal books, that were used to teach players in the late 17th century. The most famous of such books is probably the Fitzwilliam Virginal Book, which predates the RCM volume by about 100 years. That treasure resides in Cambridge, as does the current Gresham Professor of Music, Christopher Hogwood. I'd like now to tell you something of the history of the Royal College of Music. Founded by Royal Charter in February 1882 under the presidency of the Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, the college moved to its present site on Prince Consort Road in South Kensington, opposite the Royal Albert Hall, in 1894. The building you can see in this slide was designed by Sir Arthur Blomfield. Today, the Royal College of Music has over 660 students from 54 countries, studying at undergraduate, master's, or doctoral level. And the college enjoys the distinction unique amongst British conservatoires of being able to award degrees in its own right. Albertopolis was a nickname first used in the Times in April 1860 to describe recent developments in South Kensington and the Exhibition Road area. In 1851, the Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of All Nations was mounted in London's Hyde Park from May until October. The exhibition was hugely successful. Seen by over 6 million people, it made a profit of over £16 million in today's money, largely due to Henry Cole, a prominent member of the civil service and member of the Royal Commission for the exhibition, which had been founded by Queen Victoria in 1850. Prince Albert, Prince Consort, President of the Royal Commission, was keen for the legacy to continue, suggesting that the profit be used for the purchase of land to establish an area dedicated to science and art and the education of the population in these fields. The Kensington Gore estate and surrounding land, some 86 acres, was subsequently purchased. The so-called New South Kensington Museum opened in 1857, becoming, in 1899, the Victoria and Albert Museum. Cole, by then Sir Henry Cole, was the first director of the museum and a driving force in the flourishing of the Albertopolis vision. As well as the V&A, this now includes the Royal Horticultural Society Gardens, the Natural History Museum, the Science Museum, the Royal Albert Hall, the Albert Memorial, Imperial College, formerly Imperial Institute, the Royal College of Art, the Royal Geographical Society, and of course the Royal College of Music. The commission lasts to this day as a grant-making educational trust under the presidency of His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Since 1853, Prince Albert had been keen to house a musical establishment in South Kensington. Unsuccessful attempts were made to move the Royal Academy of Music, established in 1822, to the area. However, the Prince Consort and Henry Cole wanted the South Kensington institution to be nationwide in scope and open to all, with provision for scholarships. This did not accord with the nature of the Royal Academy of Music, which took private fee-paying students. The Prince died in 1861, but by 1865, Cole had founded a committee with a view to establishing a national training scheme for music. By 1873, the committee had decided to establish an independent music school to be known as the National Training School for Music. From 1875, this school was housed in the now Royal College of Organists building, which still stands today near the Royal Albert Hall. A Royal Charter of 1882 established it as the Royal College of Music. The Royal Charter established the following three objectives. Firstly, the advancement of the art of music by means of a central teaching and examining body charged with the duty of providing musical instruction of the highest class and of rewarding with academical degrees and certificates of proficiency and otherwise persons, whether educated or not at the college, who on examination may prove themselves worthy of such distinctions and evidences of attainment. Secondly, the promotion and supervision of such musical instruction in schools and elsewhere as may be thought most conducive to the cultivation and dissemination of the art of music in the United Kingdom. And lastly, generally the encouragement and promotion of the cultivation of music as an art throughout the world. The Prince of Wales officially opened the new college on the 7th of May 1883. An extract of his speech from this occasion appeared the following day in the Times, and I quote, 50 scholarships have been established, of which 25 confer a free education in music, and 25 provide not only a free education, but also maintenance for the scholars. Of these scholarships, half are held by boys and half by girls. I observe with pleasure that the various districts from which the scholars are drawn indicate the widespread distribution of a taste for music and an adequate cultivation of music throughout the United Kingdom. London, with its vast population, sends only 12 out of the 50. The remaining 38 come as follows: 28 from 14 different counties in England, 2 from Scotland, 6 from Ireland, 1 from Wales, and 1 from Jersey. The occupations of the scholars are as various as the places from which they come. I find that a mill girl, the daughter of a brickmaker, and the son of a blacksmith take high places in singing, and the son of a farm labourer in violin playing. The capacity of these candidates has been tested by an examination of unusual severity. Sir George Grove was knighted in time for the May 1883 opening of the Royal College of Music and became its first director. He had been a member of the college's council since 1881. Grove was born in 1820 and trained as a civil engineer. His mother's musical interests, however, were to have a considerable impact throughout Grove's life. It was around the 1850s that he first developed the idea of compiling a dictionary of music. Also, at this time, he came into close contact with members of the 1851 Royal Commission. Grove's association with the Macmillan Publishing House began in May 1868, when he became editor of Macmillan's magazine. Work on his music dictionary officially began in September 1873, and the first of 4 volumes appeared in 1879. Grove's legacy continues in print, most recently published in 2001 by Macmillan as the second edition of the New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, and electronically through Oxford Music Online. Having outgrown its premises by 1887, the Royal College of Music was offered land on the west side of Exhibition Road, plus the sum of £30,000 towards a new building. The college and members of the 1851 Royal Commission decided on the current site on Prince Consort Road. The result of the commission given to Sir Arthur Blomfield is the current red brick building in the French baronial style. The next slide is a photograph taken on the 8th of July 1890 at the time of the laying of the foundation stone to the Blomfield building. It shows Sir George Grove and his RCM professorial staff, as the teachers are known. The next slide shows the completed building and a view of Prince Consort Road, which had been decorated to celebrate the official opening by the Prince of Wales on the 2nd of May 1894. Since its foundation, the Royal College of Music has played a significant role in public engagement as a major player in the Albertopolis cultural quarter. An embodiment of the RCM's commitment to the Albertopolis vision was the appointment in 2007 of the eminent scientist Professor Lord Winston as chairman of the college's council. The Royal College of Music has always been linked with the royal family. Our patron is currently Her Majesty the Queen, and since 1993, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, has been the college's president. Due partly to the vision of its founders and Grove, its first director, the Royal College of Music's collections are now of international significance. This rich heritage comprises material dating from the 15th century onwards, including music manuscripts, early printed music, concert programs, portraits, photographs, film scores, diaries, musical instruments from all over the world, as well as modern repertoire and literature. There are at least 800 musical instruments, 300 original portraits, 10,000 prints and photographs comprising the most substantial archive of images of musicians in the UK, and some 600,000 concert programs which document concert life from 1720 to the present day. Aside from the educational impact for members of the RCM community, by which I mean students, staff and guests, the archival, historical, documentary, social and cultural significance of these treasures is considerable. It's true that people are treasures too, and the RCM's list of alumni is indeed distinguished, including the late Dame Joan Sutherland, Benjamin Britten, Sir Thomas Allen, Michael Tippett, Dame Gillian Weir, Sarah Connolly, 3 members of the Lloyd Webber family, Gervase de Paya, Ralph Vaughan Williams, Rick Wakeman, Roger Vignoles, Trevor Pinnock and Mark Anthony Turnage, just to name a few. But to continue, I'd like to share some of my colleagues' favourite treasures with you. The baritone by Magnus Feldlin of Vienna dates from 1647 and is considered to be the oldest surviving instrument of its kind. The baritone is a fretted bowed string instrument resembling a bass viol. In addition to the bowed strings are several sympathetic strings. The most famous composer to write for the instrument was Joseph Haydn, whose patron, Prince Nicholas of Esterházy, played the baritone. The instrument flourished only from the mid-17th until the early 19th century, and even then it was not really known outside southern Germany and Austria. Joseph Haydn is well represented amongst the RCM's treasures, including his manuscript of the first of the Opus 64 string quartets, the one in C major, dating from 1790. This work is amongst the so-called Tost quartets, composed for the Viennese violinist Johann Tost. In this slide, you can see Thomas Hardy's 1791 portrait of Haydn, which has been reproduced in many studies of the composer. This painting was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1792. Between 1790 and 1795, Haydn made 2 visits to London under the auspices of the impresario Johann Peter Salomon. Salomon's portrait was also painted by Hardy and hangs near the one of Haydn in the Royal College of Music's Museum of Instruments. An instrument which almost certainly spent its pre-RCM life in a domestic rather than a concert setting is the square piano by Collard and Collard. Made in about 1840, this mahogany piano was purchased by the college in 1965 and restored by Derek Adlam in 1969. The firm of Collard and Collard was run by 2 brothers, William Frederick and Frederick William. They enjoyed relative commercial success and worked with the pianist, composer and maker Muzio Clementi. Following Clementi's death in 1832, the Collards assumed sole responsibility for the firm. Square pianos, horizontally strung, were most popular in the 18th and early 19th centuries. In 1810, over 80% of pianos made here in London were squares, but by 1850 this figure was only 7%, as improved upright pianos captured the domestic market. They were more able to accommodate a larger keyboard range in their frame, within which the strings were arranged vertically. The tenor trombone, played by the teenage Edward Elgar, was made by Boosey & Co. in about 1875. The bell of the instrument is inscribed thus: "This instrument, on which Sir Edward Elgar played as a boy, has been kindly presented by him to the YMCA music section." The Royal College of Music received this as a gift from the Ealing and District YMCA in 1934. Apparently Elgar was not the most proficient of trombonists, so it's appropriate that his legacy is also represented in the RCM collections by the manuscript of his cello concerto, Opus 85 in E minor. The work, which dates from 1919, was issued in facsimile by Bärenreiter in June 2007 to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Elgar's birth. I rather like Bartolomeo Nazari's 1734 signed and dated portrait of the castrato Farinelli at the height of his fame. The painting was commissioned by William Capel, 3rd Earl of Essex, during his tenure as British ambassador in Turin. In 1734, Capel was negotiating for Farinelli to perform at the opera season here in London at the King's Theatre Haymarket. The resultant performances were a triumph for the castrato, both musically and financially. Farinelli, born Carlo Broschi in Bologna in 1705, was 29 when this portrait was painted. He's now regarded as the most celebrated castrato of his day. According to a report in Johann Friedrich Agricola's Introduction to the Art of Singing of 1757, Farinelli was in the habit of eating one uncooked anchovy before he sang. Other RCM treasures include a letter from Ludwig van Beethoven to the composer and publisher Anton Diabelli, written in the spring of 1823. The letter concerns the necessary proofreading and copying of the 33 variations on a waltz by Diabelli prior to the work's publication. We also have one of the surviving manuscripts of Chopin's waltz in D-flat, Opus 64, number 1, the so-called Minute Waltz. Composed in 1847, the work was published by Breitkopf and Hertel of Leipzig the same year. The survival of more than one manuscript version of this, as well as some of Chopin's other music, suggests something of the improvisatory nature of his performances. Perhaps we've lost a little of the spontaneity this implies with our often slavish adherence to the printed text or score. These items are treasures indeed, but in my opinion, the most consistently exquisite, significant and valuable holdings came to the Royal College of Music thanks to the vision and generosity of Sir George Donaldson. Here's Donaldson in a portrait by Frederick Sandys, painted in 1878 when Donaldson was 33 years old. George Hunter Donaldson was born in Edinburgh in 1845. The Oxford Dictionary of National Biography tells us little of his early life, but that he settled in Paris in the late 1860s, where he nurtured his interests in historic furniture and works of fine art. He returned to England in 1871, establishing himself here in London as an art dealer in New Bond Street. Donaldson's business remained there until his retirement in the 1890s. Testimony to Donaldson's wealth was the property he accumulated or rented in the UK and Europe from the mid-1880s. Upon retirement, he settled in Hove, East Sussex, whereupon he opened his own museum. Donaldson was decorated by the Grand Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1885, the Légion d'honneur in 1892, and in 1904 by Edward VII with a knighthood. He died in 1925 at his home in Hove. Donaldson's interests, both professional and private, included musical instruments. He gave his personal collection of these to the Royal College of Music in 1894, a gift which deliberately coincided with the opening of the new Blomfield building. Donaldson wrote and published a catalogue of instruments for private circulation only, which included photographs and brief descriptions of each instrument. The title page declares it to be a catalogue of the musical instruments and objects forming the Donaldson Museum, presented to His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, KG, President of the Royal College of Music, on May 2nd, 1894, to form the permanent museum of that institution. Donaldson himself was allowed to decorate the room in which his instruments were displayed, and his additions include a minstrel's gallery from Siena and coffered ceiling. These features remain to this day in what is now the reading and reference room of the Royal College of Music Library. Donaldson continued giving to the college, and as we will discover soon, this included treasures other than musical instruments. Amongst the keyboard instruments Donaldson gave the RCM is an instrument called the clavicytherium, which you can see on this slide. This instrument is regarded as the earliest known stringed keyboard in existence and was one of Donaldson's 1894 gifts. The clavicytherium dates from the period 1480 to 1500 and was most likely made in Ulm in southern Germany. It is neither signed nor dated. Think of the instrument as an upright, single-strung harpsichord with an outer case. The clavicytherium had previously belonged to the wealthy Contarini family of Venice. The city of Ulm had close trading links with Venice, so it's possible that there was contact between the makers and the Contarinis. Then it passed to Count Pietro Corra, one-time ambassador of Venice to the Austrian Empire. In 1885, Corra loaned it to the International Inventions Exhibition in London, of which Donaldson was one of the organisers. There's a seal on the outer case of the clavicytherium, which is probably a custom stamp from what was the instrument's final journey, from Corra's residence near Venice to London. Other musical instruments collected by Corra now form an important part of the extensive holdings of the Museum of Musical Instruments in Brussels. The English keyboard player, maker and restorer Derek Adlam has approximated a range or compass for the clavicytherium, including 2 pedal notes tuned according to need. The sophistication of the instrument's design and craftsmanship bears witness to an already established tradition of making such specimens. Sadly, woodworm infestations have rendered the instrument beyond playing condition, and it cannot be subject to constant scrutiny. Nonetheless, a playable reproduction was made in 1973. We will now hear a recording made on this reproduction instrument of an anonymous work entitled Sequitur Tenor Generis Majoris from the Buxheimer Orgelbuch of about 1470. This recording was made in 1997 by Richard Gauman, who was an assistant in the RCM Museum. George Donaldson collected other instruments too, including brass, woodwind, string, and ethnic specimens. I'm a wind player working primarily in the arena of historical performance. Therefore, several treasures of international significance and personal importance from the Woodwind family warrant mentioning here. The next slide features 3 of these, all given by Donaldson in 1894. Moving from left to right, we start with the treble recorder by Jakob Denner from early 18th century Nuremberg. This ivory instrument is elaborately decorated, suggesting something of the importance of the person for whom it was made. The Denner family was the largest in the master guilds of Wildruf and Horndreher, makers of game or hunt whistles used as calling or luring devices, and turners of bone and animal horn. Musical instruments by the Denner family were exquisitely crafted and highly sought after. In 1784, Christian Friedrich Daniel Schubart wrote that their flutes are famous throughout the whole world. They reached as far as Constantinople and Isfahan, even via missionaries to China. The workshop established by Jakob Denner's father, Johann Christoph, has been credited with the invention of the clarinet. However, we cannot be sure of this, since no clarinets by J.C. Denner survive. Nonetheless, it's likely that experimentation in the workshops of Denner, Johann Wilhelm Oberländer, father and son, and Johann Georg Zick, during the late 17th and early 18th centuries, was motivated by the recognition of the recorder's inability to cope dynamically within the developing orchestral medium. The instrument in the middle is a clarinet, slightly later, but not dissimilar to those the Denners were making. Made of ivory, this two-key clarinet is by Georg Heinrich Scherer of Butzbach, central western Germany, and dates from about 1740. One silver key is visible at the front, and there is another on the reverse. Clarinets with two keys are the earliest form of that instrument and appear in music by composers as celebrated as Georg Friedrich Handel, Jean-Philippe Rameau, Georg Philipp Telemann, and Antonio Vivaldi. Another rare instrument by Scherer, a one-keyed flute, also in ivory, was given to the RCM by Donaldson. Donaldson certainly collected in Paris and Italy, and it's likely that the two rare Scherer instruments were sold together. In the mid-1980s, his grandson is reported to have said that Donaldson would go anywhere to buy an instrument he wanted. The last instrument on this slide is another treble recorder from Nuremberg, dating from the mid-18th century. The Oberländer workshop was typical of most of this time, and in addition to clarinets and recorders, was known to have made flageolets, flutes, and oboes. On the next slide, we see three basset horns, and this allows us a glimpse of this unusual member of the clarinet family and favourite of Mozart. These instruments were made in Vienna and in Prague, and thus represent two of the most important centres of basset horn making. The slide shows at least two of the three known shapes of basset horn. The anonymous instrument on the left, whilst the least common amongst surviving specimens today, is the same design as the basset clarinet on which Anton Stadler performed Mozart's clarinet concerto. Sadly, Stadler's instrument and Mozart's manuscript are both lost. The instrument in the middle, shown in colour, was made by Raymond Griesbacher, who played the basset horn himself, often in trios with Stadler. He was based in Vienna. Instruments from the workshop of Franz de Leisch in Prague were all date-stamped, which makes it easier some 200 years later to know exactly which music fits best. Unfortunately, this instrument's missing a mouthpiece and a bell. For evidence that Donaldson was a man with both taste and money, we need look no further than his gift to the RCM of one of the greatest treasures of the collections, and indeed one of the most important music manuscripts in the UK. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart wrote 27 piano concertos. Thanks to Donaldson, the manuscript of Mozart's Concerto No. 24 in C minor, first catalogued in the 19th century by Ludwig Ritter von Köchel as K491, is here in London. Mozart is without doubt the most celebrated composer of Western art music. His prolific output and early death have contributed to this status, and the consistent quality, breadth and inventiveness of his music remains unsurpassed. How did the Royal College of Music end up with such a priceless treasure by such a famous composer? The manuscript of the C minor piano concerto was sold by Mozart's widow Constanza to the music publisher and dealer Johann Anton André of Offenbach am Main. In 1800, André issued authoritative editions of 6 grand concertos as Opus 82. This opus included Mozart's concertos numbers 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 and 27, namely K467, K482, K488, K491, K503 and K595. André's publication helped ensure that Mozart's piano concertos entered the repertoire at a time when keyboard virtuosity and keyboard instruments were both progressing at an exponential rate. Beethoven admired K491 and Felix Mendelssohn performed it during the 1830s and 40s. The manuscript of K491 then passed to Johann Baptist Streicher of the firm of Viennese piano makers and son-in-law of André. Then in 1856, according to Donaldson, the manuscript was purchased by Otto Goldschmidt, the German-born conductor and pianist, and husband of the soprano Jenny Lind, who was one of the first singing professors at the Royal College of Music. 2 years later, in 1858, Goldschmidt settled in England and brought his Mozart manuscript with him. Put up for auction by the firm of Puttick and Simpson for Goldschmidt, the manuscript was bought by Donaldson, who gave it to the RCM in 1894. I agree with Dennis Matthews, who, in his critical edition to the first facsimile of the work, published in 1979, wrote, "The autograph of a much-loved masterwork is liable to have a sentimental appeal quite apart from its intrinsic musical value." Mozart's own handwritten thematic catalogue records his works from 1784 until 1791. The entry for the 24th of March 1784 reads, "A clavier concerto accompanied by violins, violas, 1 flute, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, 2 trumpets, timpani and bass." It's likely that Mozart himself premiered the work on the 7th of April at the Burgtheater in Vienna. 3 weeks before this concerto, Mozart had written the A major concerto K488, and a little over a month after the composition of K491, he wrote his opera The Marriage of Figaro. This gives us an indication of his compositional speed, one which is confirmed by the actual manuscript. Mozart's reputation for relatively neat and tidy manuscripts was to blame for the long-standing misconception that he wrote his music off the top of his head. At least the manuscript of K491 goes against that trend, as it's often untidy, with lots of alterations and deletions. In works where he was the intended soloist, Mozart often left passages quite bare, knowing that in performance he would improvise or decorate as he felt appropriate. The current slide features the first of 2 pages from the manuscript that I'll show you tonight. And of course you have another one with you. This page is from the end of the first movement. You can see the words del segno, as well as 4 faces that Mozart's drawn. This indicates that here, in the coda, Mozart wants to reuse material from bars earlier in the movement, where, incidentally, he drew another little face on the score. Note also the rapid semiquaver figuration on the penultimate stave of the page. The second page is taken from the opening of the third movement, not far in from the page on the postcard you've been given. You can see in the lower right-hand part of the page many crossings out, making deciphering this difficult at first glance. The piano right hand starts on the 4th stave from the bottom, and then 3 bars before the end, continues back some bars on the 6th stave up. I've brought my own copy of the facsimile with me this evening, so please come and have a look at it after the lecture if you'd like to. Simon Keefe, in the Cambridge Mozart Encyclopedia of 2006, describes K491 as, even by Mozart's extraordinary standards, one of his greatest instrumental works. Let's now hear an excerpt from the beginning of the third movement. In this recording made for EMI Classics in November 1990, we hear soloist and RCM alumnus Melvin Tan with the London Classical Players, conducted by another RCM alumnus, Sir Roger Norrington. Tan is playing a forte piano made by Derek Adlam after the Viennese maker Anton Walter. K491 is one of only 3 Mozart piano concertos to include clarinets in the orchestra. In this recording, the principal clarinet is none other than the current director of the Royal College of Music, Professor Colin Lawson. of the most recent treasures acquired by the Royal College of Music is the oldest known English language instruction book for the clarinet, entitled The Clarinet Instructor. This treatise, tutor or method book was purchased by the RCM late last year and predates by 8 years a similar publication housed in the British Library. Whilst the two tutors are quite similar, the RCM tutor's date of circa 1772 marks it as a holding of great significance. This item came to the college from a book dealer in America, in the state of Massachusetts, in a volume which contains another clarinet tutor as well as a collection of music. The clarinet instructor is the first tutor bound in the volume. The next slide shows the first page of actual music for the aspiring clarinetist to practice. Clarinet tutors of this kind have been issued since the late 18th century, catering for a growing market of amateur players. The sentiments of the clarinet instructor continued to be reproduced with ever so slight variations well into the 19th century. However, by the 1820s, new methods were written to accompany new instruments with greater amounts of key work. The directions given in this tutor are of a relatively literal and simple nature, which may point to a different, perhaps even amateur readership in comparison with contemporary methods by continental writers. They might also suggest, however, that such instruction books were used by performing musicians already competent on another instrument. I'll now play two of these pieces on a 6-keyed clarinet pitched in C. This instrument was made in London in the workshop of Goulding & Co. in about 1800. The largest number of surviving 6-keyed clarinets is by English makers, and the majority of these were made in London from 1785 onwards. In celebrating the past, let us salute the vision of Sir Thomas Gresham, which resulted in the establishment in 1597 of Gresham College. The first Gresham Professor of Music, John Bull, was appointed by Queen Elizabeth I herself. An account of Bull is contained in another of the RCM's treasures, a manuscript copy of a lecture entitled The History of the Gresham Professors of Music, John Bull, given in 1838 by the then Gresham Professor of Music, Edward Taylor. Taylor was born in 1784 and worked across theory and practice, writing, speaking, performing as a bass, training choirs, and also playing wind instruments. Manuscript copies of 3 of his Gresham lectures are part of the RCM collections. Taylor's manuscript reads, Dr. Bull had graduated in music at Cambridge and was admitted afterwards to the same honour in Oxford in 1592. 5 years after this time, the patriotic and munificent intentions of Sir Thomas Gresham were carried into effect, and Gresham College was open to the public. The other professors were named, at the request of the Gresham Committee, by the Universities of Cambridge and Oxford, but the appointment of the musical professor was referred to Queen Elizabeth, and Her Majesty was pleased to confer it on Dr. Bull. This was not an empty compliment paid to the Queen as Queen, but a judicious appeal to a competent judge. He continues, all the Gresham lectures were originally directed to be delivered in Latin as well as in English. Chiefly it seems that foreigners, as well as natives, might profit from them. From this double duty, Dr. Bull was specially exempted. Taylor continues, Dr. Bull had only filled the office of Gresham Professor 4 years when ill health interrupted the discharge of his duties, and with a view to its restoration, he was advised to travel. During his absence, his place in the college was supplied by Thomas Bird, son of the celebrated William Bird. At the expiration of a year, he returned to England with recruited health and resumed his official duties. After an account of Bull's travels on the continent, Taylor continues, Bull resigned his Gresham professorship for what reason does not appear, as he did not quit England till several years afterwards. During the reign of Elizabeth, favours and honour, reward and renown attended the English musician. The example of the Queen was imitated by her nobles, and fashion as well as good taste was enlisted in support of the art. But, as I have before intimated, no sooner had James succeeded to the throne than the blight of neglect passed over the luxuriant field of English vocal harmony. The caprice and indifference of the court infected those who surrounded it. Taylor continues, no wonder that our professor should have regarded England as no longer the fit residence for him, and that having witnessed the respect paid to musical talent in the Netherlands, he should have determined to exchange neglect and prescription here for honour and profit there. No wonder that he should have declined to serve under those French favourites upon whom, as musician, he must have looked down with unmeasured contempt, and have chosen as a fitter residence a country in which his talents would be estimated at their real value. Dr. Bull, remarks Burney, has been censured for quitting his establishment in England, but it is probable that increase of health and wealth were both the cause and the consequence. He was praised, indeed, at home, but not adequately rewarded, and it is no uncommon thing for one age to let an artist starve, to whom the next would willingly erect statues. The professorship of Gresham College was not then a sinecure. This and his other situation were not lucrative appointments for the first performer in the world, and those other means of increasing his income, which are now within the reach of the composer or performer, were not then open to this wonderful musician. And finally, back to Taylor, our professor's instrumental productions are not likely to commend themselves to the acceptance of a modern and mixed audience. They are rather to be studied and appreciated by the few than enjoyed by the many. The article on Bull in Grove's first Dictionary of Music from 1879 was written by Edward Rambolt, Esquire, one of England's earliest self-confessed musicologists. Rambolt admits to a certain amount of conjecture in recounting the life of John Bull. The late Susie Jean's article on Bull in the current edition of Grove sheds further light on his life. Bull was quite poor and made numerous petitions for money to Queen Elizabeth. The Gresham chair with free accommodation and a regular salary was therefore a most welcome appointment. Scant information is known about Bull's university career, but as a member of the Chapel Royal and a musician of some standing, he did not need to attend matriculation at Cambridge. Together with the fact that he did not need to reside in Cambridge to take a music degree, this may account for Bull's dispensation to lecture only in English, the language in which he conducted the majority of his professional life. We now know that impending fatherhood and marriage, in that order, meant that Bull had to resign the Gresham chair, leaving him to find new lodgings and income. Oliver Neighbour, who assesses Bull's compositional output in the latest Grove, suggests that his music was of most interest to historians, most of it remaining unpublished till the appearance of the Musica Britannica series, which began in the 1950s. In conclusion, let us remember Sir Thomas Gresham and his new learning. Gresham's concept complemented the learning offered at Cambridge and Oxford, which was in two parts, the trivium, grammar, rhetoric and logic, and the quadrivium, a higher level comprising the study of astronomy, geometry, mathematics, and music. Gresham's vision recognised the importance of more explicitly hands-on, almost vocational learning. This strong symbiosis of theory and practice is certainly crucial to musical learning in the 21st century. Likewise, education and training are distinct and valuable components of learning for the edification of individuals and nations. Thomas Gresham's new knowledge was not just for gentlemen scholars, but for tradesmen, merchants, and ship's navigators. Indeed, this initiative accords with the very principles behind the founding of the Royal College of Music. It's not hard to notice the rhetoric of social and civic responsibility behind the current UK government's Big Society programme. In order truly to help people, and I quote, to come together to improve their own lives, we must invoke the learning of the past, especially that which is preserved in treasures left to us by previous generations. We must continue to safeguard these treasures assiduously, passionately, and substantially in this primarily temporal and fiscally referenced climate in which we now live. John Bull's life has lessons for us in the 21st century. Edward Taylor's assessment of Bull's music reminds us that art is primarily not, and should never be, created for the uncritical, unthinking masses. Mozart's piano concerto in C minor is not blighted by a necessity to pander to public taste. Well-crafted musical instruments are revelatory far beyond mass-produced specimens. It's essential also to acknowledge the gestation period of works of art, and that with the ever-increasing impact of globalization and technology, the meaning and value of objects continues to change, and with these, their reception. Indeed, celebrating the past through some of the Royal College of Music's treasures presents us with the opportunity to question the current homogenization and democratization of art, culture, and indeed society as a whole, brought about by new forms of mass media technologies. As Thucydides wrote in his History of the Peloponnesian War, recounting the 5th century BC conflict between Athens and Sparta, men make the city, and not walls or ships without men in them. A truly big society is one where we all participate, both individually and collectively, in the exchange of learning. The well-being of society begins with the well-being of individuals. The treasure within each individual must be nurtured and safeguarded, and only through the interaction of human and other treasures can society reach its full and true potential. In conclusion, I would like to thank Professor Sir Roderick Flood, Provost of Gresham College, and the Council of Gresham College for the invitation to deliver this lecture. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Obviously the audience has enjoyed this as much as I have. And I must say you seem to enjoy it as well, which is very important in a lecture. We have got time for a few questions. If there are any hands up. There's one here. Thank you. Do you need a microphone, sir?
You mentioned that the Royal Academy of Music declined an invitation to move to the South Kensington area. I hope I understood you correctly about that. The Royal Academy of Music, yes. Was the curriculum of the newly established college then significantly different from the Royal Academy of Music at that time? And is it so now?
Well, I can speak about now, and both the college and the academy offer very similar programs, very similar degree programs, and I suppose we're probably quite similar. I think back in 1822, it was the case that part of the Albertopolis vision was to bring a music institution into that area. They'd been in Marylebone Road since 1822, and I suppose because it was very important to the founders of this new institution that as many places as possible were provided free of charge to the students, I suppose there were fiscal pressures on the Royal Academy at that time to offer courses to fee-paying students for their income. I must admit, I would refer you to a fantastic Palgrave Macmillan volume called Sir George Grove and His World, which was edited by Michael Musgrave. I think it dates from about the year 2000, but some of my colleagues are here and they probably know much more about this than me.
Thank you very much. Can I throw one in that's now I'm thinking? Where does the money come from for your purchase of instruments now at the present time?
That's another interesting question that there's somebody here more qualified than me to answer. Well, I suppose Paul, would you like to answer that question? This is Paul Banks, who is the head of our Centre for Performance History. And
I'm sorry to drag you into this. Could you take the microphone, please? So you need the microphone. Thank you.
We do receive grants occasionally, but and we've had some very generous donations. But I have to say that, as in the late 19th century, still today, most of the instruments that come to our collections come as loans, or more particularly as gifts. So it's through the generosity of collectors that the collection has continued to expand since Donaldson started it in the late 19th century.
Thank you very
thanks,
much.
Paul.
And one Sophie gentleman here. It's difficult to see faces from here. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One observation and one question. The observation, you interestingly commented about Latin, or the possibility of Latin lectures. But my understanding was that Oxford and Cambridge, Cambridge was the place where Gresham intended or had thought of founding another college. Of course, lectures at Cambridge and Oxford were all given in Latin. But when he decided to found it in London, it was specifically for the benefit of Londoners and that it should be in English so they could all understand it, that everyone could understand it.
I suppose it was also in Latin so that the foreigners could understand. And also, the reason Taylor actually is quite critical of John Bull, and actually John Hawkins, who published a music encyclopedia in the 18th century, is really very critical of John Bull over this Latin thing. But I think that we need to stop and remember that Bull didn't need to, the Cambridge degrees in those days were something that as practicing musician, you set a test, you did a task, and that enabled you to get a degree. So the fact that Bull wasn't the most proficient speaker in Latin, we don't actually really know that, is because he wasn't attending regular lectures anyway, because the music courses in those days weren't like that.
Thank you for a most interesting and wide-ranging lecture. I was particularly interested to hear from you how you use this large and wonderful collection for research, whether you do and if so, how.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, because the first piece, which was performed by one of our harpsichord professors, as part of the recordings that you can hear at the Victoria and Albert Museum, a lot of students were also involved in recording some of the pieces from that volume, which included the two pieces by Bull. So the other ground by Bull that I could have played was performed by a student. We also have in our undergraduate and postgraduate courses, our degree courses, particular units that you can take where you can work with the collections, either producing an edition of a piece of music that's not hitherto appeared in print and then performing that, or you can study various different parts of the collections, because we have lots of concerts in our museum, so it's quite a lively interaction between the students and also the researching members of staff and the collections. And it's fantastic. Last week I was in the library and our chief librarian, who's here, was showing a group of undergraduates the Mozart manuscript. And it's so important to get students at that young age to realise that when they've got their edition of the music that they take to their lesson, that there's so much extra stuff, if you like, behind this, and how that particular edition was arrived at, and how it's really empowering as a musician that you can look at the different sources and you can create your own edition. That's something that our students are quite good at.
Well, I'm afraid we've reached 7 o'clock, and I want to thank you very much indeed for a superb lecture, and thank you for talking about our founder. and the early days. And I think we've had several lectures on the early professors of mathematics or geometry. We ought to do a bit more, possibly, about the early professors of music. And the other professor at the time, in fact, the professor of physics, chair which I followed in, was also qualified in music at that time. So it really was a very popular subject. You've given us a great deal for thought this evening. I'm one of those sad people that when I hear a piece of music, I like to imagine what the early instruments would have sounded like. Which takes my mind off. I don't count every single note. And tonight you've given us some insight into this, and I think a lot of us will go away thinking, that's a beautiful piece by Haydn or Bach, whatever it is, but the instruments we're hearing today would not have been the ones at the time. You've given that. Now, I hope one person who isn't here tonight, as far as I can see, is the Minister of State for Education, because he could listen to your early description of the college. 50% men, 50% women, admission only on ability. That is just what the Minister of Education, the Minister for State wants to do at the present time. And your college did it 100 years ago. So I think he ought to listen to this, and if he doesn't, I would tell him indirectly. I don't see him very often. But we could go on for a very long... it doesn't happen very often. I could do it through my MP. He doesn't need my vote, unfortunately, even if under AV. But sorry, I don't know how I got to that. I mustn't go off on a tangent. Now, what I must do is suggest to you on the way out. Dr. Pearson was so modest. She said she didn't want to advertise her institution, but the details here of the collection, and there's a pamphlet on the way out. So if you pick that up. She also asked you, or invited you to look at the manuscripts. You could do that outside, please, because we get thrown out of here at 7 o'clock. So, in summary, a superb performance, both verbally and musically. We thoroughly enjoyed that very much indeed. And to listen to an ancient instrument so beautifully played was a real privilege for all of us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for inviting me.